to the God who invites us to be still, but the God who also raises us up when we rest in God. So, a quick survey for research purposes. Who is tired in the room? Just raise your hand. Wow. Okay, if you need someone to help you lift your hand up, just holler. We're in this together. That was a lot, but imagine what it would have been if Oliver hadn't woken us up earlier today. We are all tired, right? Aren't we? And it's not just the I watched one more episode kind of tired right now, is it? It's that kind of soul fatigue, that deep in your bones existential exhaustion sometimes in our world right now. And for some of us, it is very personal. We don't feel settled or safe right now. The constant alertness is wearing on us. For all of us, our souls are working overtime. And when we look at our world, we see that there's so much that needs to be done. And that matters. That work matters. The work for justice matters. The work for equality matters. Protecting our LGBTQ community, our trans siblings, our immigrant neighbors, autonomy and identity, it matters. It is so important to stay engaged and to stay awake in our world and in our work. But we all know what happens when we've been awake nonstop, right? Let's just say the last hour of middle school slumber parties is not pretty. There's so many knock-knock jokes. It's bad, and I don't want that to happen to you. And so today, amidst it all, we're going to pause for the cause and try our best to find some rest for weary souls. This is where the spiritual practices that we're engaging with throughout Lent enter the conversation, particularly an ancient rhythm of rest for our souls called Sabbath. That goes back to the very beginning of the rule of life in our greater tradition. And Sabbath does go back farther, yes, than Chick-fil-A even. It goes back to the beginning of the story. And we see it when we see its foundations. We will see and understand Sabbath not as a luxury, but as a necessity, and not as running away, but as an act of rest as resistance. That idea comes in part from scholar Walter Brueggemann in his book, Sabbath as Resistance, where he writes things like this. Sabbath represents a radical resistance to the producer-consumer rat race of the empire. In our own contemporary context, taking a day away from the anxiety of the system tells the system we refuse to be defined by it. It's beautiful, powerful, challenging. This idea, though, goes back to the very roots of Sabbath. When God included the Sabbath in the 10 Commandments, the rule of life for the people seeking after God, it wasn't just a self-care suggestion. It was a declaration of freedom and a direct challenge to the hierarchical gods that ruled Egypt, gods of productivity and power, who still rule much of our world and much of my life today. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, we see Sabbath described like this. Observe the Sabbath day. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath. You shall not do any work, you or your children or your servants. And it continues, or your ox or your donkey or the foreigner in your town, so that your servant may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought you out from there. This was a revolutionary idea. The Egyptian gods and taskmasters were insatiable. They demanded constant production, constant striving, and created this hierarchical system that inevitably led to anxiety and competition and exploitation of the vulnerable among us. And the Hebrew people had been slaves to that empire. Now, as I describe it that way, it may sound familiar, because today we have different names for these gods: efficiency, economic growth, career advancement, self-preservation, right? We have different taskmasters, but they're no less demanding. And the message that they speak to us remains the same. Your worth comes from what you produce, and there is never enough. Never enough time, never enough money, never enough security, never enough influence or control. It's insatiable. But God said, it will not be that way among you. And the practice of Sabbath is a practice of resistance to those gods and taskmasters, and instead answering the restoring call of a God who loves us. A radical declaration in the midst of it all that it will not be that way among us, that we are not defined by our productivity and our worth is not described by our consumption. Sabbath is this tenacious insistence that there is more to life and a chance to step in to that something more, even in the midst of our rhythms. The great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said this. He said, the Sabbaths are our great cathedrals, sanctuaries not built of stone, but carved out of our hours and days. Sacred spaces we enter not by changing our location, but by changing our relationship with time itself. The practice of Sabbath in the midst of our hours and days connects us with ourselves, with each other, and with God, and teaches us something profound about the character of God amidst all of the other gods and taskmasters in the world, and teaches us something profound about ourselves and our identity as beloved children of God. In that Egyptian framework, and the American framework as well too, you earn to earn your worth, and you strive and you labor to prove your value. But the God of Exodus, who brought people out of Egypt, said that liberation is finding our relationship defined not by striving or by laboring, but by steadfast love. A God who speaks to us and says, you are loved, period. You don't have to earn it. Right? You just need to be. You already belong. You are beloved. Rest in that. I think of Isaiah's future vision in chapter 32, where the prophet in the school of Isaiah says this, the justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness abide in the fruitful field. The fruit of that righteousness will be peace. Its effect will be quietness and confidence forever. My people will live in peaceful dwelling places, in secure homes, in undisturbed places of rest. I would like to live in that neighborhood. Right? But the promise isn't that if we work hard enough that we'll find peace. The promise instead is that when we center ourselves in who we are as beloved children of God, when we ground ourselves and work for justice and right relationship with God and neighbor, that the fruit of the Spirit is peace, and the effect will be quietness and confidence in who we are as beloved children of God. That is a vision of what will be. But Sabbath, taking a moment to rest, to resist, to remember and reconnect, is a way to pull what will be, to pull the future into the present. That's a hard thing to think of, isn't it? It's hard to trust, truly, that we are enough, that there is enough, that God is enough. And that's why Sabbath is an incredible act of faith. And it always has been. Back in the agrarian world, their labor literally meant food on the table. And so taking a day off was an act of radical trust. To truly, truly stop required a posture of deep trust. But it also reminded the people seeking after God of how the world really works. Apart from those who said they knew about the real world, it reminded them of how much our real life really depends on grace. We can work long hours to prepare the soil and to tend the crops, but we can't just by force of will make a single grain grow out of the ground. A bigger power, life, is needed. And Sabbath helps us remember that. And remembering that in this powerful way, like that grain of rice, that grain growing, breathes life back in to us. The Sabbath passage in Exodus says this: 6 days shall you work, and the seventh day you shall rest, so that you may be refreshed. The purpose. And that Hebrew word, winafesh, literally means to have the soul breathed back into you. And we need that, don't we, right? Our souls need that breath breathed back into us. I often try to cover that need in my soul with speed. Just go, go, go. And my calendar ends up looking like a Tetris game that I lost. But Sabbath is this invitation to clear the board and to acknowledge, even just for a little bit, that what is needed most can't be seized or achieved, but must simply be received. And so you may be thinking, Sabbath sounds nice in theory, but I can't even, right? And that's the point. We can't. And so we must. So we got to start somewhere. And start small with whatever you have. Take a Sabbath hour. Take a Sabbath afternoon. Take a Sabbath moment at a red light today. It's okay. The person behind you will let you know when it's time to go. You're good. Just take all the time you need. Isn't Sabbath like a luxury that we can't afford? Isn't it selfish to rest when there's so much work to be done? You can say that, but I would argue the opposite. You can't pour from an empty cup. And Sabbath is essential precisely because the work is so important and so demanding. The work of justice calls on us deeply. And so Sabbath reminds us that in our work for good and what is right, that it all depends. Our efforts depend on something bigger, on the Spirit of God, the love that wins, working alongside us and through us and with us. It is a moment to pause from the work so that we can return to the work in full and empowered and remembering where that work begins and where it leads. Because importantly, Sabbath itself is justice work. Remember, that commandment, as it's articulated in Deuteronomy, included not just heads of households taking the day off, but children and servants and immigrants and even the animals that labored as well too. Everyone gets invited to rest. Sabbath was radically egalitarian in its solidarity. And so when we practice Sabbath, even just for ourselves, we are declaring that people matter more than profit, that relationships matter more than productivity, that there is enough for everyone if we share, and that all have dignity and worth. Sabbath is what we're working toward. And so to practice it now offers us all a foretaste of that shalom, that universal flourishing that is the end goal of our justice work. We are pulling the future into the present, one red light at a time. And when we work to pull justice down, we also have to make sure that we're pulling down peace along with it. Without that vision, justice work can become bitter or reactionary or burned out. But with it, God willing, our work flows from love rather than fear, and from hope rather than hate. And we step out into our world in full and empowered in the love and grace of God that is with us. So what could Sabbath look like in modern practice? I'm going to give you 4 words that you can apply in whatever way you are able over today or over the next week or time ahead. 4 words are these. First, cease. This is where it starts. Start small, but be intentional. Begin with where you are and what you have. Maybe an hour, maybe a few minutes of just ceasing and real presence. The key is attention and intention. Sabbath is a moment to let go of our white knuckle grip, to release, and instead to receive something deeper, to reconnect, to remember, to cease. And in that ceasing, to rest. Allow your body, your mind, your spirit to be renewed. Create some boundaries so you actually can do that. This isn't escapism, it's an honest recognition that we all have our limits and we all have our needs and that we all depend on God's grace rather than our own efforts alone. On the Sabbath, everything that is inessential bows to that which endures. On Sabbath, we're not meant to do, but to be. And so let us find that quiet center of rest. The third thing is this, the third word, cease, rest, and embrace. In our rest, take a moment to embrace what nourishes you and what delights you. A good book, a good piece of music, community, conversation, the goodness of creation, the joy of just being alive for a moment. Remember those things and embrace them and endue them. Whatever brings that natural, life-giving joy in the present moment, embrace it in this time. And then finally, feast. Sabbath has always been connected to shared meals and to shared celebration. Our Jewish siblings finished Sabbath with a glass of wine and by smelling sweet spices and with a celebration together. The spices are to be this fragrance that lingers with them until they find Sabbath again. And the celebration in that feast, it helps them create countercultural rhythms that reverberate throughout the week ahead, even after the day is done. Feasting and celebrating our life together connects us with a new rhythm deeply, too. That's the beauty of Sabbath, that it can begin in solitude and stillness. But even if that is our practice, it leads us more deeply into community and to solidarity. The pastor, Barbara Brown Taylor, writes about it like this. She says, "It may be solitary, but we do not do it alone. God did not give this commandment to a person, but to a people, knowing that only those who rested together would be equipped to resist together." To remember the Sabbath is to remember what it means to be made in God's image. And when the Sabbath ends, to join God in the holy work of mending the world. That is why, even with everything, that we continue to prioritize gathering together in community. And why our gatherings at Arapahoe often include a chance to take action as a community, to be a part of that mending of the world. When we remember our sacred dignity as we gather in God's love, we also remember the dignity of our neighbor as well. Today, out in the lobby, there's a table out there that gives us a chance to work with Equality Texas to write postcards as LGBTQ plus persons and allies that stand up for what is right against the indignity of hundreds of pieces of legislation that are flooding from Austin. Tomorrow is Trans Day of Visibility, and this can be our way of saying you are seen, you are loved, and we see you and each other in this life together. Sabbath helps us see God and ourselves, and it helps us see our neighbor as well. And I hope you'll take the opportunity at the postcard table to do just that. This last week, along with Dallas Dialogue Institute, Arapahoe hosted a Sabbath fast-breaking feast together here with our siblings in the Muslim community during Ramadan. And it was, as you can see, this beautiful, true, joyous, deep, life-giving feast together. One of my stories began before that night even started, and it just keeps going. Marilee Hayden was shopping out in the community and struck up a conversation and a friendship with a Syrian shop owner and invited them and their family to our church for the Ramadan dinner. And they came. That's the first miracle. One, that people still invite people to church. And two, that people come, right? Those are miraculous things. It's amazing. But there's more to the miracle, right? It keeps going. They gathered around the table that night, and Marilee and Don and Sharon Stevenson and another couple from Turkey were just talking the night away and becoming friends over this feast. But the feast, as it does, didn't stop there. They exchanged numbers, and everyone joined around the table again this week for iftar dinner, the sunset dinner after a day of fasting during Ramadan. And it ended with 10 different versions of baklava. I'm telling you, there is abundance, right? There is abundance in this. That's a feast. But it didn't even stop there. The theological conversation spilled about that they were having around the table about differences in gender equity between the Bible and the Quran continued throughout the week. People joined it on Facebook, and it became this liberating conversation that continued to grow. And now they are planning to meet monthly together as friends. The solidarity and the simplicity, yeah, isn't that awesome? The solidarity and the simplicity of Sabbath became this table feast of friendship and mutuality that just keeps growing wider and wider. And so though Sabbath may begin in solitude or in silence, it doesn't stop there. And this story doesn't stop there either. Now I'm telling you, and if you tell someone at lunch about this story, it will just keep growing and growing and growing, because that's how God works. And amazingly, that's how Sabbath works. Taking a little moment to center our life. Life grows from that center as we cease, as we rest, as we embrace, and as we feast. And then, like a refreshing breath that goes through our whole body, it empowers us to go back into the world, transformed, reconnected, remembering, acknowledging our dignity and our shared dignity as beloved children of God, called to join in healing this broken world by pulling together when the world would pull us apart. And for a little while, pulling the future into the present and pulling us all into the center of love. Those who rest together are equipped to resist together. To remember the Sabbath is to remember what it means to be made in God's image, the God who rested and called it holy. And when the Sabbath ends, to join God in the holy work of mending the world. Friends, I hope that you'll find some space this week to cease, to rest, to embrace, and to feast, and to go forth refreshed, even in our busiest seasons, even in our most anxious moments, even in our deepest justice work. The promise of God remains for us. There are places of rest, undisturbed and available to us. Secure homes for our souls, a peace that passes all our understanding. May our rhythms resist the pull, but instead pull the promise of what will be into the present of what is. May it be so in us and through us and for us as we meet God in the depths. May we meet the God of life, whose life empowers us. Amen.